They showed up like they owned the place. Two HOA officers in dark uniforms, clipboard in one hand and arrogance in the other. Without warning, they began hauling away my tools, claiming I'd violated community standards. I watched in disbelief as years of hard work disappeared into their truck. What they didn't know was that my brother, a Special Forces veteran, was on his way home that very night. And when he found out what they'd done, let's just say the HOA's power trip was about to hit, a wall they never saw coming. I moved into that neighborhood for peace. That's all I ever wanted. After 10 years of working construction, saving every dime I could, I finally bought a little home on a quiet street called Willow Bend Lane, the kind of place where lawns looked copy-pasted and every mailbox was painted the same dull shade of gray. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The mornings were calm back then, birds on the fences, sprinklers ticking across the yards, and the hum of garage doors rolling open as everyone left for work. The neighbors waved, sometimes smiled, but mostly kept to themselves. It was the kind of community that felt safe, at least on the surface. That I kept to my routine, early shifts, long hours, and quiet evenings spent fixing up the garage. That garage was my escape. It wasn't just a place to park the truck. It was my workshop, my therapy. I built furniture there, restored old tools, and even helped a few neighbors fix things when their stuff broke down. People called me the handyman, and honestly, I liked that, but not everyone did. The IT started small, notes left on my door. Please store materials out of sight. Or noise after 6 p.m. violates HOA guidelines. I thought they were harmless reminders until I noticed the tone getting sharper and colder. My workshop had become a target. The HOA apparently decided my garage looked too industrial for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Still, I complied. I moved the wood planks inside and closed the garage door when working. But they weren't satisfied. Every week, another letter. Every month, another warning. Then came the inspection. Point two HOA officers, or as they like to call themselves, enforcement representatives, arrived one afternoon while I was at work. My neighbor, Mr. Callahan, told me he saw them walking around my property, taking pictures. They even peered through the windows. When I called the HOA office to ask why, I got the same rehearsed response. Routine compliance check. That phrase stuck in my head. Routine compliance check. Because nothing about what came next felt routine. I started noticing subtle changes in how people looked at me. The friendly waves disappeared. Conversations were cut short when I walked by. Rumors started spreading that I was running a business from my garage, violating community bylaws. None of it was true, but the damage was done. The HOA had labeled me as non-compliant, and once they do that, you're never just another homeowner again. Point one morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my door. Final warning, property violation. Immediate action required. Apparently, some of my tools were visible through the garage window, and that was clutter. That was the first time I realized how much power they had, not just over my property, but over how I lived, what I built, and even how I looked. In my own neighborhood. I called my brother that night. He was stationed overseas at the time. Special Forces, the kind of guy who'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. I didn't want to bother him, but I needed someone to talk to. He laughed at first when I told him about the HOA. So, what? Neighborhood cops now, he joked. But then he heard the tone in my voice and grew quiet. Don't let them push you around, he said. They're not the law. But the thing about HOAs, they act like they are. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. I'd come home to find citations on my porch, photos in my mailbox, and fines stacking up faster than I could dispute them. It was like a slow siege. No shouting, no threats. Just quiet intimidation hidden behind official letters and polite emails. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, early. I'd stepped out for coffee. When I returned, there were tire marks in my driveway, and my garage door was halfway open. Inside, empty spaces. My compressor, my saws, even my storage bins, all gone. For a second, I thought I'd been robbed. But then I saw it. An HOA notice taped to the wall, signed by the same officers who'd been inspecting my property weeks earlier. Property seized for community compliance. They didn't even have a warrant. I stood there, staring at that paper as my hands shook. Every memory, every late night of hard work, every piece of equipment I'd built with my own hands, gone. Just like that. That's when my phone buzzed. It was my brother. He was back in the States, earlier than expected. When I told him what happened, there was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence. Then he said just 5 words. "I'm coming over. Don't move." And in that moment, standing in the hollow echo of my empty garage, I realized this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. It was about something much bigger, because they'd taken the wrong man's property, and they had no idea who was coming to get it back. When my brother pulled into the driveway that night, the sound of his truck engine alone made the quiet street feel different. The neighbors peeked through curtains, pretending not to stare. He stepped out, calm but sharp-eyed, the kind of presence that filled the air with tension before he even said a word. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at the empty garage, then at the paper still, taped to the wall, that smug notice, with the HOA logo at the top, and I could see the storm building behind his silence. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Show me everything." We spent hours going through the paperwork, letters, fines, photos, and compliance warnings. Every one of them more absurd than the last. There were citations for leaving my truck parked in my own driveway, and for visible equipment, even though my garage was closed, and even one for improper storage of materials, meaning the wooden shelves I'd built inside. Each letter had the same name signed at the bottom, the 2 officers who'd seized my property. But what got my brother's attention wasn't the rules themselves. It was the dates. The seizure notice was dated 2 days before the HOA had even sent the official violation warning. They jumped the gun, he said, eyes narrowing. They didn't follow procedure. That's illegal. That word, illegal, echoed in my head. But in communities like ours, the HOA didn't need to be right to win. They just had to keep pushing, keep intimidating, until you broke down or gave up. And most people did. Not my brother. Why the next morning, he'd already drawn up a plan. He started calling county offices, asking about property seizure laws and HOA authority. Every time someone put him on hold or tried to dodge his questions, he'd note the name and time. He wasn't just angry, he was surgical. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down. That same week, I got an email titled Notice of Escalation. It claimed I owed $3,800 in accumulated fines and that non-payment could result in further action, including foreclosure review. Foreclosure over garage tools. It felt unreal, like a bad movie where the villain hides behind polite smiles and printed policies. My brother told me to stay calm, but I could tell he was seething. He'd spent years dealing with bureaucrats in uniform, and he recognized the same arrogance here, only wrapped in HOA stationery. He did what he did best. He started watching. Every morning before sunrise, he'd sit in his truck, parked across the street, camera ready. And sure enough, they came. The same 2 HOA officers, walking from house to house, jotting notes, snapping pictures like they were running a sting operation. But when they reached our house, my brother stepped out. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just asked one simple question. "Do you have a warrant?" They froze. One stammered something about community policy. The other tried to act tough, saying they were within their rights to conduct inspections. My brother took a slow step closer. "Then you won't mind if I record this, right?" He lifted his phone and hit record. The tone shifted instantly. They backed off, muttering about calling the HOA president. But my brother didn't care. He wanted them on camera. The footage became our shield. And, as it turned out, our sword. By the end of that week, things started getting strange. The HOA board sent out a community-wide email warning residents about harassment of HOA personnel. They didn't name names, but everyone knew who they meant. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. A few even avoided driving past our house, like we'd become radioactive. Then one night, I woke up to movement outside. My brother was already up, standing by the window, motionless. 2 figures in reflective vests were parked near the curb, flashlight beams darting across our yard. "More compliance officers?" I whispered. "Not this late," he said. He slipped on his boots and stepped outside. The moment his flashlight hit them, they bolted, sprinting to a car and speeding off into the dark. The next morning, there was a new letter on my porch. Unauthorized recording of HOA personnel may result in penalties. That's when it hit us. They were watching us now. But intimidation only works if you stay quiet. And my brother wasn't built for silence that he printed out every document, every photo, every rule they twisted to fit their narrative. Then he started attending HOA meetings, not as a homeowner, but as an observer, quiet, steady, listening. The first time he spoke, the entire room froze. He read out sections from their own bylaws, pointing out contradictions, illegal enforcements, and falsified signatures on inspection reports. Each revelation hit like a grenade in that perfect little conference room. The president of the HOA tried to shut him down, claiming he was disrupting order. But my brother simply smiled. Disorder, he said, is what happens when people abuse power. The room went dead silent. After that, we became their obsession. They started patrolling our block daily. Letters doubled, fines tripled. But what they didn't realize was that my brother was collecting everything. Every phone call, every document, every visit, and he wasn't the only one watching. Anymore. A few neighbors, the quiet kind who'd kept their heads down, started sharing their own stories. Fines for garden decorations, threats over paint shades. One woman had been fined for hanging her flag too low. Another had her dog banned for excessive barking, even though she lived 2 streets away from the complainant. The HOA's power wasn't just ridiculous, it was unchecked. My brother decided to change that. A week later, a storm rolled in. The sky was bruised gray, the air thick with electricity. It felt fitting, like nature itself was waiting for something to break. That morning, we got a call from the county office. One of the clerks my brother had spoken to had dug deeper into the HOA's records. What he found made my blood run cold. The HOA had been using expired compliance codes. Their authority to seize property had been revoked months ago, meaning every item they'd taken from my garage had been stolen. That we had proof. My brother didn't waste time. He filed a formal complaint with the county's property enforcement division and sent copies of the seized item list, signatures, and security footage showing the officers on our property. Then he did one more thing. He CC'd the entire HOA board. That night, they called an emergency meeting. We weren't invited, but we showed up anyway. When we walked into that meeting hall, the tension was thick enough to taste. The board members sat in a row like nervous schoolchildren, papers stacked in front of them. Avoiding our eyes, my brother laid a folder on the table. You took what wasn't yours, he said calmly. And now, you're going to make it right. The president tried to brush it off, calling it a misunderstanding. But my brother leaned forward. Misunderstanding doesn't cover breaking into private property. That's called theft. And then he did something I'll never forget. He hit play on his phone. The video showed the 2 HOA officers, in broad daylight, entering my garage without permission, hauling away boxes, equipment, tools, everything. The timestamp matched. The date of the predated seizure notice. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, stammered excuses. The HOA president turned pale. One of the officers even tried to leave, but my brother stepped in his path. You're not going anywhere, he said quietly. Not until the police get here. Sirens echoed down the street as flashing lights painted the neighborhood blue and red. People gathered outside, whispering. Some recorded. Others just watched. The officers were questioned on the spot. One of them broke quickly, admitting they'd been pressured by the board to enforce strict examples to keep the neighborhood in line. The president denied everything until my brother pulled out an email chain, linking him directly to the order. That's when the mask cracked. The same people who'd lectured everyone about community standards were now arguing, blaming each other, and trying to rewrite the story in real time. But it was too late. The truth was already out. As the police escorted the officers out, one of them glanced back at me, the same man who'd taken my tools. His expression wasn't arrogant anymore. It was fear. That night, my brother and I sat on the porch, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. He didn't say much, just looked at the empty driveway and nodded. This isn't over, he finally said. But now, they know who they're dealing with. The morning after the hearing, the neighborhood didn't sound the same. No more patrol cars creeping by. No more flyers tucked under doors. For the first time in months, Willow Bend Lane was quiet. Not the kind of silence born from fear, but from relief. I remember stepping out onto my driveway, coffee in hand, the sun barely peeking over the roofs. The air felt lighter, The tension that had coiled through the neighborhood, like barbed wire, was finally gone. My brother stood next to me, arms crossed, watching the wind rustle through the trees. "They'll replace the board," he said, his voice steady. "They always do. But it's not about who comes next. It's about making Suryo one like them ever runs it again." He was right. Within a week, the story spread. The footage from that meeting, the confrontation, the arrests, the reveal, made its way onto local news. Reporters called it the HOA scandal that shook a community. What they didn't say was how deep the rot went. The county's investigation uncovered everything: misused funds, forged maintenance contracts, fines that were never reported. For years, the board had been padding their pockets under the guise of community upkeep. And the illegal seizure of my property? It was just the spark that lit the fuse. The president, Collins, faced multiple charges: property theft, falsifying records, and abuse of authority. The officers who'd carried out the seizure were suspended and later dismissed from the HOA's enforcement team. The rest of the board? They resigned one by one as the heat closed in. By the end of the month, the HOA was dissolved pending legal restructuring. County-appointed officials were brought in to oversee financial audits and ensure compliance with real housing laws, not the ones the board had made up to control. People, neighbors who had once stayed silent, began to talk. Stories poured out about intimidation, threats, and fines so absurd they'd become jokes whispered over fences. One man admitted he'd almost lost his home over unapproved mailbox paint. Another said he'd been fined for leaving his kids' bicycle by the porch. And through it all, one thing became clear: the HOA had never been about protecting property values. It had been about control. As for me, my garage was restored piece by piece. Two county trucks arrived one morning carrying my seized tools, boxes, and equipment. Each item was tagged and logged and returned in full. The officers unloading them looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as they carried everything inside. My brother supervised silently, making sure every last bolt was accounted for. When they left, I stood in the doorway, staring at the familiar clutter, the smell of oil and sawdust filling the air. It felt like getting back a piece of my identity, something they'd tried to strip away. Later that night, I cleaned every tool, not because they were dirty, but because it felt symbolic, like wiping away the fingerprints of their control. My brother leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. "You know," he said, "most people would have given up long before this." "I almost did," I admitted. "If you hadn't shown up." He smiled faintly. "Then they'd still be running this place like their own little empire." Sometimes, all it takes is one person to say enough. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood began to change. The fear was gone. People started talking again, not in whispers, but in full voices, right out in the open. Fences that had divided neighbors turned into meeting spots. A few families even organized a small community barbecue, the first one in years. That day, laughter replaced the tension that had haunted every cul-de-sac. Kids ran down the sidewalks, dogs barked, and music played softly from someone's porch. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. One of the women who testified at the hearing, Mrs. Callahan, came over carrying a plate of brownies. She said quietly, "You don't know what you and your brother did for this place." We were all too scared to stand up to them. My brother shook his head. "You all did the hard part. We just held up the mirror." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that comes from years of tension, finally letting go. Not everyone was happy, of course. Some former board members tried to spin the story, claiming it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by outsiders. A few even tried to form a new HOA committee. But the idea died quickly. People had seen the truth too clearly to ever go back. Instead, the community voted to create an open neighborhood council. No secret meetings, no selective enforcement, just residents talking to residents. Rules became guidelines, not weapons. And for the first time, people actually volunteered to help keep the place clean and organized, because it was their decision, not an order handed down from above. The atmosphere shifted completely. The fear that once lingered in every corner of the street turned into something else: ownership, pride, unity. And maybe that's what power is supposed to look like. Not control, but connection. The legal aftermath stretched on for months. Collins took a plea deal, admitting guilt to property theft, and falsifying documents. He avoided jail time, but was barred from ever serving on any homeowners association again. The county recovered tens of thousands in unreported funds, which were redistributed to residents through refunds and community improvements, new sidewalks, repaired streetlights, and a public park. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same people who'd weaponized the idea of community improvement had ended up paying for it. My brother returned to duty. A few weeks later, before he left, we stood by his truck. Again, the same spot where this entire nightmare began. Are you going to be all right here? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, this place isn't what it used to be. And maybe that's a good thing. He gave that small, knowing grin of his. Just remember, peace doesn't mean silence. It means standing your ground when someone tries to take it from you. He started the engine, rolled down the window, and added, next time they send letters, make sure they spell your name right. I laughed for the first time in a long while. Then he drove off, leaving a trail of dust that shimmered in the morning light, like the last remnants of a storm. Finally clearing, months later, life settled back into something normal. I rebuilt the workshop, finished projects I'd abandoned, helped a few neighbors repair things in their garages, too. Word got around, and soon people were dropping by not because they were curious or cautious, but because they trusted me. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the street lights flickered on, I noticed something small but powerful. My neighbors weren't afraid anymore. No more side glances, no more tight smiles. Just normal people, living side by side, without fear of the next letter in the mailbox. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about tools or fines or even one corrupt HOA. It was about what happens when ordinary people start believing they have no power, and what changes when they realize they do. The HOA had ruled through silence, through intimidation, through a system that thrived on people being too scared to speak. But the moment someone pushed back, the moment someone said no, the entire thing crumbled. Maybe it's the same everywhere. In neighborhoods, offices, or anywhere authority goes unchecked. Power doesn't vanish when you question it. It just shifts back to where it always belonged. The people. The garage door creaked open one last time that night, revealing the neat rows of tools gleaming under warm light. The air smelt like sawdust and paint, the scent of work, of creation, of freedom. I ran my hand across the workbench, the same spot where they'd once left that notice. The memory still stung, but now it reminded me of something else, that no matter how much they took, they never really owned anything that mattered, because the real foundation of a community isn't rules or fines or threats. It's trust, respect, neighbors who look out for each other, not over each other. And as the crickets began to sing and the sky turned to amber, I smiled. Justice had taken time. It had been messy, painful, and exhausting. But it came, not because someone powerful delivered it, but because someone refused to let it be denied. In the end, they learned something my brother had known all along. You can build walls, write rules, and hide behind authority, but the moment you cross a line against the wrong person, you'll find out just how fragile your power really is. So what would you have done if your own neighborhood turned against you? What if the people meant to protect property values decided to take your property instead? Some battles aren't fought on battlefields. They're fought on driveways, in mailboxes, and in the silence of good people who finally decide to stand up. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage to turn fear into change and remind everyone that power only works when we let it. If this story hit home, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if the HOA came for you? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next time, we're going even deeper into the world of HOA power plays, revenge, and justice. Served cold.